Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our conversation on transformative philanthropy and innovation. As we kick off this week discussing shaping a shared future, I would like you all to take a moment and think about that shared future, the shared future that you want. You can close your eyes if you'd like to. Think about a timeline. Is that a year from now, a decade, a generation? What does that future look like? Is it fair? Is it equitable? Is it peaceful? Have we conquered disease? Do we live in balance with a healthy planet? Have we all found agency and purpose? Collectively, are we thriving? I would assert that a most critical element in achieving that shared future is philanthropy. Philanthropy can be an unrelenting North Star in turbulent times. It is our society's risk capital that's advancing solutions. It's informing capital flows. It's changing policies that can best serve our future. Philanthropy can crowd in the voices of lived experience, and it can be the connective tissue between ideologies and sectors. Philanthropy is a critical lever for change, for transformation and innovation. So I'm so excited this morning to have such incredible leaders of philanthropy here on the stage with me to have this conversation about how philanthropy is and should be and can be creating that shared future for all of us. So in terms of quick introductions, all the way to my far right, we have Pablo Legarreta, who is the CEO and founder and chairman of Royalty Pharma. He is one of the largest investors in life science innovation, and his philanthropy focuses on medical research and clinical care. Next, we have Strive Masiyiwa, who is the founder and executive chairman of Econet Group and co-founder of the Higher Life Foundation. He and his wife, Tsitsi, are signatories of the Giving Pledge, and he serves on the board of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Next, we have Dame Louise Richardson, who is the president of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, which provides grant funding to advance education and international peace. She's the former vice chancellor of Oxford University and a global scholar on international security. And last but certainly not least, we have Mark Walter, who is the founder and CEO of Guggenheim Partners, founder and CEO of TWG Global, and an active philanthropist focusing on social impact and conservation efforts locally and globally. So I, of course, have a number of questions I'm going to ask. Throughout the session, a QR code will come up, and you can submit questions that we'll get to later in the session. So I want to start us off with you, Louise. Many consider Andrew Carnegie to be the father of modern philanthropy. He started the Carnegie Corporation in 1911. He endowed it with what would be, in today's dollars, $4.5 billion, with the mission of advancing and diffusing knowledge and understanding. He also wanted to adopt principles of scientific philanthropy, meaning investing in the long-term progress of our society. How do you think about balancing holding this North Star for long-term progress while being nimble and agile in a rapidly changing world?
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Well, Andrew Carnegie was quite an extraordinary man. He came to this country as an impoverished immigrant, started as a child laborer, and went on to become the richest man in the world. When he sold his steelworks to JP Morgan, the price was the equivalent of 2% of US GDP. He was entirely self-taught, and he believed in education above all else. Education, as he described it, as a ladder to help people advance themselves as he had. So amongst the things that he did, he built 2,500 libraries, 1,600 in the US, and a raft of other things. But he resolved to give all his money away. He thought very seriously about philanthropy and how to bring business practices into the distribution of philanthropy wisely. He wrote a book called The Gospel of Wealth, in which he said that the man who dies rich dies disgraced. So his goal was to give away all his money before he died. He didn't quite succeed in doing that, so he gave the residue of his fortune to set up this corporation. But he very wisely said that while he cared about peace and education, he left it to his successors, the subsequent trustees, to decide how to expend this money. And that's where I come in and my colleagues come in. And keeping the lodestar of education and peace, and Lord knows they are as important now as they were in 1911, we have a great deal of flexibility in how we interpret that because of his wisdom. And for me, I feel an extraordinary sense of responsibility, having been given stewardship of this money. How do we spend it as effectively as we can? How do we adapt to the changing world around us, while still thinking broadly around the themes of education and peace? So I spend my days trying to decide how we can have maximum impact with the money that we have.
Great, thanks, Louise. Strive, I want to turn to you. You started Econet nearly 30 years ago when many in Zimbabwe had never heard a ringtone. You brought telecommunications, you now brought renewable energy, financial technology, cybersecurity, so many other services to sub-Saharan Africa. Over 100 million customers impacted, over $38 billion in mobile wallet transactions, hundreds of thousands of jobs created. You've certainly improved lives and livelihoods through your work in the private sector. As an entrepreneur, what lessons can we learn from that to bring to philanthropy, and what continues to be the distinct lane for philanthropy to work alongside the private sector?
No, thank you, and thank you for having me, and good morning to everybody. Look, it's always great to be here. You know, as a philanthropist, my own philanthropy journey, the more I reflect and look back, the more humility I seek, because, you know, I served on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation for 15 years. And he was a contemporary of Andrew Carnegie. And obviously, I've had the privilege to work alongside Bill and Melinda Gates as they are in the process of giving away $100 billion. Africa itself has not yet produced men and women of those kind of extraordinary wealth. But that does not mean there's no philanthropy in Africa. There's a lot of philanthropy in Africa. In fact, most African philanthropy is done by Africans themselves. It's just defined differently. And it's important to get a perspective sometimes, because it's easy to lose sight of some of these perspectives. And I was just reflecting on this as I was coming here. 60 years ago, at the birth of African independence, less than 10% of our people were literate. Most of the colonial powers left countries in Africa with 2 high schools. Today, in most African countries, literacy is now 80%. It was done by Africans. African governments spend more money per capita on education than any other continent from our budgets. But when you look, for instance, at the single largest inflow of money into Africa today, it's not from foreign philanthropy. It's from Africans working in the diaspora. The single largest source of foreign exchange into Africa today, far exceeding ODA, far exceeding international philanthropy, is Africans sending money home to send children to school, to build clinics, to help support families. That is philanthropy. And that is what is truly building Africa. So I just wanted to kind of remind us all of that, because we are absolutely grateful as Africans for our friends and the support they give us. But don't lose sight of our own contributions, the contributions of our own people. Our GDP was 350 billion 60 years ago. It is now 3 trillion. Mm-hmm. Only China expanded faster than Africa during that period. Mm-hmm. Our population went from about 250 million to 1.3 billion. We are not dealing with famines because of that. You know, we have challenges, we have wars. There's a big war in the center of Europe. We have our fair share. We have challenges like everybody else. But we mustn't lose sight of the progress, the extraordinary progress that Africa itself is taking charge of through self-governance and running of their own countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Strive, and thank you for bringing in that aspect of the diaspora. And I think that really underscores the definition of philanthropy, which is love for humanity. And I think you showcased that so well. Pablo, I'd love to turn to you. Your career has been in the life sciences sector, which we know is, which takes incredibly high risk, right? It takes over 14 years, over $1 billion to develop a new therapy. 95% of experimental therapies fail on their way to the market. What is, in your perspective, what is the role of philanthropy in serving as high-risk capital within that system? How have you seen that work broadly and specifically in your own philanthropy?
Sure, thank you, Melissa. And it's so great to be here and to start the Milken conference with this really important topic, which is philanthropy, that has become really dear to myself, my wife. I'm actually involved in several philanthropic initiatives on the health education side and also on trying to improve health outcomes. And it's a very personal topic because in our case, our eldest son was born with a condition, urinary reflux, that caused him to have kidney failure. And he had a surgery which corrected the reflux, but he had infections which damaged his kidneys. And I knew from a very early age that he was going to need a transplant, and I was not happy with the outcomes in transplantation. Transplantation works, but then the immunosuppressants take a toll, and 10 years out, only about a third of kidneys that are transplanted still function. And I thought there was significant potential for improvement. And in about 2017, as he was already a teenager, but his kidney function was declining, I took it upon myself to try to go around the world and look at what technologies existed to actually improve outcomes in transplantation. And I went to look at work being done at Stanford University, Northwestern, and elsewhere outside of the US also, but eventually came to a group at Mass General Hospital that had incredible data on 10 transplants that had been done starting in 2002 through 2009, where 8 of 10 patients were able to get off of immunosuppressants. This is the holy grail of transplantation, being able to perform a transplant and not have to use immunosuppressants for life. Now, what happened, and this gets to the point of risk, there was this very special, unique antibody that was discovered in Belgium and by a postdoc of this man at Mass General Hospital, David Sachs, who really developed this. His life work has been in tolerance. Basically make a patient tolerant so that you don't need immunosuppressants. And the antibody was licensed to MedImmune, which ran trials in psoriasis, 1,000 patients treated. It was very, very safe. Now, it turns out that when it got to phase 3, there were other products that were being studied in psoriasis, and others, like Humira, had much better efficacy data. So MedImmune decides to abandon this drug and not develop it anymore. But the team at Mass General had gotten their hands on this antibody, which is really special because it conditions the immune system, and did this 10 transplants. And when I saw them in 2017 and I looked at the data, I said, my God, this has to be in the market. Why isn't it in the market? And eventually that led to myself getting involved with a team, Swedish transplant surgeons. David Sachs put together a company, took on this antibody, and then refiled with, they needed money also, so I was able to put together some capital. And essentially what happened is that the whole program was relaunched, and very fortunate for my family, my son had a transplant 2 years ago with my wife as the donor. And what occurred in this transplant, which is unique, not common, and this is why this is so cutting edge, is that my wife also donated bone marrow. And that brought my wife's immune system into my son. Now, the antibody that he received for 7 days and other agents, other products, conditioned his immune system to accept my wife's bone marrow, and her bone marrow educated his immune system to look at her kidney as self and not attack it.
Wow.
So what's remarkable is that my son today is at a dose of immunosuppressants, only one, monotherapy, not the typical 3 immunosuppressant therapy, and at a dose that is almost at this point not clinically not doing anything. It's less than a milligram per day. Normally you're at 10 to 15, and it's so low that the doctors now are going to space out. They started so that he only takes it 3 days a week, and probably in a few months he'll be at 0 immunosuppressants for life, meaning that he will be immunocompetent and not require any more immunosuppressants and have a normal life, because the drugs is what really end up producing this loss of kidneys and other organs. And what's remarkable is that this company that now is taking this to market, we've done now, we have clinical trials in liver and kidney in delayed tolerance patients that had transplants years ago. If the donor is alive, you can ask for the bone marrow, condition them, and then you don't need to transplant. The kidney or the liver are already in, and all you do is you wean off the immunosuppressants. So the point here, Melissa, is it's shocking how in life sciences, it's such a complex world that sometimes things fall through the cracks. And this is necessary. It's badly needed. And I think the hope now is that transplants will be done with this kind of protocol, and we won't need immunosuppressants. And this ended up then leading to my wife and myself, our family, creating a center at Mass General Hospital. We got behind this last year with a meaningful contribution. And it's the Center for Clinical Transplantation Tolerance, where we really want to push this and take this, really optimize the regimen so that eventually patients can receive organs and not need immunosuppressants. So as you can see, it's been incredibly personal for me, but it's resulted in huge benefit to my family. There's already more than 30 patients that with my son have been transplanted, and there's many that are already at 0 immunosuppressants. So this is a reality.
Yeah. We often say that you don't go to medical philanthropy comes to you. But thank you, Pablo, for meeting the moment when it came to you. Mark, I want to bring you into the conversation here. You have articulated that one of your major goals is to promote equity by countering systemic obstacles that block opportunity for marginalized people. And you're doing that quite dramatically through the education systems in Chicago. And you've invested in a number of different programs, tutoring, counseling starting in 4th grade, programs that overcome trauma, closing the post-secondary degree gap. So changing an education system holistically, what have been your lessons learned in that journey with philanthropy to drive such transformation?
Yeah, I think that if you're sort of a normal business person, you attack problems fairly directly. And so, if you need more copy paper, you buy more copy paper. In philanthropy, and particularly in education and in social issues, there are so many emotional, human aspects to it that if you don't spend a significant amount of your time and resources identifying those, they'll trip you up. So as examples, probably we started first with something called One Goal that worked inside the Chicago Public Schools to provide an accredited class to teach kids how to study and how to go to get into college and to persist. So not any subject matter, but just things that if you grew up in a normal, affluent suburb, your parents or other people would just know that these kids didn't know. But we taught it in the Chicago Public Schools because it was the most direct way to do it. That program has taken off. It's got tens of thousands, probably has 100,000 students now, and in more cities than just Chicago. So we also identified then that there seems to be a big gap for these same inner city kids to find their way into either entrepreneurship or into good jobs. where they had real careers and felt that they had real careers. We identified that one of the biggest reasons that they didn't pursue a significant list of careers was because they didn't believe they could do it. And it was that simple absence of belief that was really holding them back. So we sort of started down the same road, that we would make part of, and starting very young, their education process, learning how you grow into careers and/or entrepreneurship. This time, though, that wasn't as easy to do inside the schools because that is pretty foreign to normal education. So we started to do it outside the schools, inviting the children to come to locations where we had our own teachers. And what we discovered, including as recently the last couple of years, that threatens people. So people who are involved in the traditional education system are threatened by that. And so as a simple example, that in the Chicago Public Schools, they started a new school in Bronzeville that includes a lot of vocational training. It is an incredible school. They've done a very, very good job at it. And the only issue that we identified was that only 6% of the kids who applied from the neighborhood to get to the school they were able to handle. So we thought a simple answer to that would be, we just build another one, that we would pay for and do. They did everything they could to fight that because it threatened them and their success. And we were literally just going to copy what they'd done and effectively expand on it. And my only point is that it kind of brings into the conversation something that I think kind of exists. Maybe it exists, at a very obvious and high level, which is that the competition that seems to exist among different parts of our society is moving ahead of the underlying objectives. That instead of us having, an attack on education or poverty or peace or social justice, we've got a political environment that is us against them. And I think when people try to stop you from building a school in a neighborhood that basically copies, we'll give them credit for having copied it, that they don't want to do that for what I think amount to political reasons, that those of us who are trying to be active, and really anyone, we need to send that message to our leaders that we care more about results than group identity.
Thank you, Mark. So, Louise, I can't pass up the opportunity to invite you to share your thoughts on investing in human capital and education, given your previous role as Vice Chancellor of Oxford. I know you joked that you left for college at 17 and you just finished a year ago. But feel free to jump in on that, but also on Mark's point around this us versus them. We're living in this very pervasive, polarized world. It's us versus them, despite knowing that there's multiple truths. What's the role in philanthropy in moving us to a society, to a place where we appreciate interconnectedness, we respect differing viewpoints, and we're working collectively towards the shared future?
Well, I think the kind of polarization or binary thinking that Mark has just described poses an enormous threat to our society generally, and certainly to the philanthropist's effort to move us forward. I lived outside this country for 14 years. I came back a year ago, and I've been amazed at the accelerated pace of polarization in the interim. And I was living in Britain, which prior to the pandemic, I would argue was about as polarized as this country was, as evidenced by Brexit, a national act of self-harm, if ever there was one, but leaving that aside. Post the pandemic, Britain is much less polarized than America is. And my hunch is the reason for that is there are a couple of unifying institutions in the UK, like the BBC, like the National Health Service, which even though they have critics on the right and left, are essentially trusted. I think we're lacking these single trusted institutions here, which makes us polarized or much more fragmented. And I see this polarization as a threat to everything we're trying to accomplish. So we are making a big move at Carnegie to try and address this polarization. For example, we put out a call for proposals from academics across the country. We asked all the university heads to nominate top academics who were thinking about this, and we got over 360 nominations. So we're going to fund about 30 of these academics for 2 years to try and come up with ideas as to how we might mitigate this polarization. We're also investing in a raft of areas like supporting community service initiatives, supporting the revival of local media and so on, all in an effort to try and rebuild the forces of social cohesion, which are being torn apart and undermining extraordinary initiatives like the ones that Mark is describing. So I think we're in a very privileged position as philanthropists to try to address these problems, because we don't have we've no political skin in this game. We just want to get things accomplished. And we've got to figure out ways to ensure that the society in which we operate is more conducive to working together across boundaries to get results.
Thank you, Louise. So in that spirit of working together, Strive, I'd like to turn to you. You've been working on systems change as well, and investing in and building thriving communities through the Higher Life Foundation. I've heard your daughters speak so eloquently about how you have taken them to the orphanages that you have built. They've slept there. They've befriended children who are there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do we effectively integrate the values, the preferences, the viewpoints of the people who are living in the systems that we're trying to change, to make sure that their voices and views are included?
Certainly. From the outset, our own approach to philanthropy as a family is always that at the best you can be as a philanthropist is catalytic and getting behind the programs of the countries themselves, the people themselves. Don't come in with ideas from outside as if to suggest to people they don't know what they're doing, but rather get behind what they are doing. Ask them how they would solve the problem, if perhaps the resources were made available. So for instance, in our approach to education, where we came in to assist following the HIV pandemic, there was a system. There's a natural cultural system in which people, we may not have government systems like the NHS, and where wealthy governments can pay for things. But that doesn't mean that when you lose a relative, people don't want to help children, orphans. So we got behind the traditional approach to say, okay, if your relative, if you've lost your sister and you want to keep her child in school, what assistance do you need? And by getting behind that, we didn't really have to build orphanages except in very rare circumstances. But we put the children back into the communities, worked with the communities, and because of that, we were able to keep tens of thousands of children in school and get them educated. So you can work, if you work within the communities. My whole approach is get behind what the Africans and their governments themselves are doing. Respect what they are doing, like we did on the pandemic. When I led the initiative for the COVID response, okay? Everybody told us to go away, because they wanted to look after their own people first. But we got, as African governments, we mobilized our own resources. And whilst a lot of people died around the world, if you look at the number of people who died in Africa, it was the lowest as a percentage of the population. And that was because we worked with the African governments, with the African institutions, supporting their solutions and their approaches, because they're the ones who, A, have the mandate, they're elected. So they are the only ones who have the mandate to represent those people. And secondly, they are coming from those communities, and we've got to respect that and support that. So that is always our approach.
Yep. Thank you, Strive. Mark, I'd like to invite you to join this part of the conversation. You're working on key conservation efforts in the United States, but also in Zimbabwe, in Namibia. You've preserved dozens of rare species. Can you talk about this partnership with communities and local governments as well that have allowed for the success and sustainability of that work?
Yeah, I think when people think of conservation, they may either think of wild places or animals. But the truth is, conservation is 95% about people. Listening to you talk, it reminded me, we have a pretty large reserve in Zimbabwe. It's 1 million acres. And at the time that we took it over, we were having rhinos poached at around one a week. And at one a week, we have a very large population, but at one a week, they were going to be gone in a couple of years. And of course, then everything is interrupted in terms of breeding and everything else. Rhino poaching is organized crime. And organized crime can really only operate where the communities around it either do nothing or promote it. So, and along with what your comments said, we went out to all of the villages within 25 kilometers of our border. And, 1 million acres, 25-kilometer perimeter of that is a lot of villages. But instead of telling them what we were going to give them, we asked each village what 3 things they would like help with. And good for us was that in almost every village, a clinic and help with their school, which gave us some ability to have some synergy in building clinics and helping them with schools. And then the third thing that most villages asked for was some thing that would support whatever their economic outputs were. I should have started with, these are very poor villages. I mean, the houses all have dirt floors. If they could get water or irrigation, or for example, some of the villages grow seeds that we bought fairly primitive processing plants to turn it to oil, but that equipment that changes the seeds to oil triples their income to be able to sell oil instead of seeds in bags. And the outcome of doing that for them and making them part of our community, I mean, I think they see us as a positive thing in their lives. We've had 1 rhino poached in the last 3 years. And when poachers, who all really are, these cartels are from other places. So when a stranger shows up within 25 miles of our border, we get a phone call. And I think that is 100% about helping those communities. Plus, I mean, you feel pretty good about seeing transformation in those places.
Thank you, Mark. So Pablo, I want to turn back to you. We talked a little bit about your individual philanthropy. Would like to talk about your corporate philanthropy at Royalty Pharma. And we're seeing, corporations are bringing not just capital, but they're bringing know-how, large-scale operations. They're bringing intelligence, skills, expertise to certain areas. Royalty Pharma has committed $20 million to Mount Sinai to promote health equity. You're a founding corporate partner of the Life Science Cares New York, which fights poverty and inequity throughout the city. Can you speak to this through line in your corporate giving that has this focus on health equity?
Absolutely. And also, comments made by Luis and others made me reflect a little bit about polarization. And the conclusion I came to just very quickly thinking through this topic is that fortunately, in life sciences, I don't think there's a meaningful impact to philanthropy as a result of polarization. Obviously, the political polarization we're living through impacts life sciences or healthcare in different ways, maybe in pricing or reimbursement or other things. But in reality, funding, in my mind, has not been affected because you have governments that have this very significant commitment to improve health. NIH budget, $50 billion last year. When I started, Royal Pharma was $14 billion, so growing. One thing that has happened in this country that is incredibly unique is the disease-specific foundations that have been started by many entrepreneurs that do well. Mike Milken, Prostate Cancer Foundation, and there's 200 of those in the US. And those have become really important funders of innovation. You were asking about taking risk. They take risk. It's so expensive to develop drugs, and it takes such a long time that these disease-specific foundations have become a really important contributor of early money to really, figure out things that maybe companies won't, or because of the risk. But to your point about corporate philanthropy, another comment that I would make is, I'm involved with another foundation, Open Medical Institute, which is doctors giving their time to educate other doctors in developing countries. It's shocking to me that doctors in the US from many, many hospitals are willing to give 1 week of their practice, close their practice, and go to this Open Medical Institute and train doctors from the developing world. And they do it because they're giving back to their community. And in healthcare, there's this psyche or spirit of doctors of giving back. So it's zero polarization. They do it just because they want to give back. But in terms of corporate philanthropy, for us it was a very easy decision. Royalty Pharma has done well, and we were looking for something to get involved where we could actually help improve health outcomes. And we, in conversations I had with one of the top chairman of Mount Sinai, I realized that they were launching this institute called the Institute for Health Equity Research, where the goal is to actually understand why are there so significant, enormous disparities in access to health in the US and also health outcomes. This is one of the countries, as you all know, with the best healthcare, really cutting edge. 75% of the products developed by the ecosystem are developed by US companies and approved, when you look at approvals by FDA and EMA. But what's so shocking about the US is that we have this huge disparities in access to health and health outcomes. So when Mount Sinai decided to launch this initiative, we thought it was just a great way for Royalty Pharma to get behind this and support it. And what's been such a pleasant thing for me to see, it's that it's not only been economic contribution to the effort, but we have teams at Royalty Pharma, data scientists that actually spend a lot of time looking at data and making sure that we are making good investments. But this team embraced this initiative at Mount Sinai and now are collaborating with scientists from Mount Sinai and other hospitals to try to do, look at a lot of really interesting, data perspectives, claims data, and other things to try to really understand fundamentally what is the problem. And we're now starting to publish papers, and it's basically my colleagues at Royalty Pharma with the scientists from Mount Sinai that are really starting to answer the questions of why this health disparities exist in the US, but not only that, but then what are the solutions that can be implemented around New York City. New York City is remarkable. It has, if you look at the Upper East Side and you look at the Bronx, two contiguous zip codes, you have people that have access to incredible hospitals, and that population there can have the best health outcomes in the Upper East Side and the worst in the Bronx when you look at the US. And how do you bridge this gap is really what IHER is doing, and with great success, and very proud to be involved with this.
Great, thank you, Pablo. So I want to talk a little bit about the sustainability of philanthropy and sustainable funding models. Strive, you've in the organizations that you've been involved with, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, they've made big plays with impact investing. Within your own work, you have the Reimagine Rural Fund that features concessionary capital with low-cost loans, but provides a revolving fund. What do you think about the role of new financial mechanisms that will allow us to recycle capital and to create more sustainable funding?
Well, I look forward to the day when there is no philanthropy. Good philanthropy is one that does away with itself. I very much supported Bill and Melinda Gates' decision that there will be a sunset even to the world's largest personal philanthropic organization. Because ultimately, like I said at the beginning, philanthropy can only be a catalytic part of solving human problems. But at the end of the day, what is sustainable is effective governance, effective leadership, countries being able to raise capital, mobilize resources, their own internationally. We are here at the Milken Institute. Okay, Africa's foreign direct investment is less than Singapore, a continent with 1.3 billion people. We're not going to solve that problem with philanthropy. We have to be serious, okay? We have to address those fundamental issues of infrastructure, schools, bridges, the things that the African people themselves want to see, okay? Then, conservation is one thing, but our people want schools, they want roads, they want bridges. They don't want outsiders coming in and saying, oh, it's very nice, that we like the way you live, you live nice, simple lives. That's not how they elect their governments, okay? They want to see real development taking place. They want to see investors coming in. Those are the challenges that we as Africans will have to address.
Yep, great, thank you, Strive. Mark, I know you built into your business models sustainability into the funding, the funding mechanisms. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was really a combination of trying to, if you're going to have students who have the chance to learn about businesses and careers, then they're really going to need to have places where they go to work. And so we started to try to identify as many different kinds of companies that would take on students, and of course there's the funding requirements. So we really combined those, and we acquired pieces of significant private companies and contributed those to the organization. So now the organization owns percentages of the businesses that the kids go to work at, or that the kids are interested in careers at, and that has a sustainable aspect to it because the growth and profit of those equity stakes, which also encourage the connection for the children, also it pays for it.
Yeah, great, thank you. So on this theme of sustainability, Louise, I want to invite you to share your thoughts about the sustainability of the philanthropic sector overall. So Strive, yes, we should be putting ourselves all out of business, but maybe not too soon. So Louise, can you talk about how we need to mitigate the vulnerabilities around philanthropy, especially in light of the current and global cultural and political climate that we're in right now?
Well, I really share this ideal, but I think it is an ideal that we would be put out of business. My predecessor had the mantra, we're an incubator, not a life support system. But in fact, I think we are a life support system for many very worthy organizations. I think the sector is really vulnerable at the moment to the political polarization in the country. The right is critical of philanthropy for funding liberal causes. The left is critical of philanthropy as a place where rich people hide their money. and that fortune should actually go to the government in taxes. So I don't think we have paid enough attention to building allies for our work, and we need to be much more conscious of how we do ensure that we stay long enough, exist long enough to address the problems that we face, because they are enormous. And what I've tried to do is look at our work through the eyes of people who disagree with what we're trying to do. So, for example, we spend a lot of money on support for immigrants, as befitting an organization whose funding comes from an immigrant. But I asked my staff to think about, if you were somebody a poor person in this country who was not an immigrant, you might look at what we are doing and say, wait a minute, why are you giving all this support to people coming into the country? I've been here for decades, my family have been here for decades, and we have no jobs. We're losing, our kids are not getting an education, they're dying of opioid addiction, and so on. So if you look at what we do through the eyes of a critic, you might revisit how you spend your money, and this is what I'm trying to do. So when it comes to support for immigration, for example, or migrants, we have pivoted towards teaching English to migrants to ensure that to facilitate and accelerate their integration into society and ensure that they become taxpayers and contributing to society more quickly, but also as an indirect way of undermining the criticism of migrants by demonstrating that these, by and large, are people anxious for work, anxious to contribute, will help address the labour shortages in this country, and so undermine their criticisms of them. So I've gone fairly systematically through everything we do to try and look at it from the perspective of the critic and see if maybe there's some legitimacy to the views of the critics, and we should adjust accordingly.
Terrific. Thank you, Louise. We've got some great questions that have come in that I want to turn to. The first is, there's so much wealth sitting on the sidelines. I know we've seen hundreds of billions of dollars sitting in donor-advised funds, for example, wealth amassing around the world. What call to action would you have to send fellow philanthropists to jump into the game? How do we get capital off the sidelines and activate it into philanthropy? This is a jump ball, so anybody's can grab it. A stumper, guys.
Yeah. We can tell the story of the extraordinary people who've done this, the Chuck Feeneys of this world. I mean, there are philanthropists out there who have resolved to give all their money away in their lifetime. I've got to, but not being personally wealthy, I've got to believe there's enormous gratification in doing that. So I think we need to talk up the examples of the people who have done that at a minimum.
I agree, Melissa. I think if one can point to what has been done in the U.S. In terms of philanthropy by individuals, it's an example to the world. And it's a lot of people outside of the U.S. talk about the tax benefits that exist in this country and how that have really promoted giving through deductions. But it is really an example of how. But it's not only that; it's also the culture, right? I come from Mexico, and I saw it how, from the very early ages, my kids at school were always educated by their teachers at very young ages of giving back to your community, getting involved to give back to your community. Different projects, going to a kitchen to prepare food for people, or all sorts of things. And you're brought up with that culture. But then, obviously, that translates into a continuous involvement of citizens in the U.S. in community work as you grow and as you succeed. And obviously, those that end up, doing well in this country it's very common that you actually get involved with philanthropy. So I think the money, there's so many foundations in the U.S. that are working on so many different topics. I think, at least the way I see things, it's the challenge is how do you put that money to work so that it's really effective? in really delivering results for society, right? And how do we measure those results? And I think one of the things that Faster Hears has done so well in life sciences is try to introduce that psyche of, you're a foundation, you need to see what you're doing with the money, how can you measure results and be more effective. But I think the US is definitely an example for the world. And we need to get, maybe, as you were saying, that we need to get local communities all around the world to become a lot more involved in charity. And it happens, I agree with you that it happens at the grassroots level, but there's much more that can be done outside of the US.
Pablo, I beg to differ. I think it's the fact that in America you do things in a particular way doesn't make that the only way. Others give too. They give in the rest of the world, believe it or not. They just don't give in the same way. They may not structure the tax systems to benefit giving the way you do. And there's no doubt I've been involved in American philanthropy for a long time, and Americans are incredibly generous. But a very small part of your giving goes outside the United States. Let's not forget that. So the world isn't running on American giving. It is running on the giving. Europe gives, others give too. Let's not have this approach that our way is the only way. I think that's important. That's why I talked about the importance of humility at the beginning. The world isn't going to be, philanthropy plays a critical piece, yes, but there is a lot more else going on. It's not the billionaires solving the problems of the world, I'm afraid. But it'd be good if they can do more. And that's why I'm a member of the Giving Pledge, that we can do more, for sure. But let's not make a definition that this is philanthropy. Therefore, if you don't do it this way, it's our way or the highway for the rest of you. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, both of you. We have some questions around how do we scale some of the systems change that we've talked about? What's the role of policy in bringing this change to larger communities? Mark, do you want to take that, given your systems change work?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing I touched on earlier, is that we've got to get everybody involved and to feel good about being involved, instead of being suspicious about the other guy. And I think that's probably the largest thing that's in the way. Because there's a lot of built up demand for making change. But I think that people can become easily discouraged, maybe not even easily discouraged, just discouraged, by people getting in the way and kind of confronting them. As opposed to saying, look, we both want to do this, how about we use somebody else's idea of how to do it, but let's get it done, instead of, the groups don't trust each other.
So here's a question that I think piggybacks off of your comment, Strive, around billionaires are not solving all of the world's problems. How do we expand philanthropy beyond the wealthy to include today's youth?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
How do we expand philanthropy beyond the wealthy to include today's youth? How do we get youth more involved, engaged in philanthropic efforts?
Is that for me?
For anyone.
Oh, okay. Well, what I always tell the youth, and I hold a lot of town halls with young people, you don't give when you have. The greatest thing you can give in philanthropy is time.
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 Yeah.
Okay? That's why I accept to go on boards of other philanthropists, because time is the most important thing that you can give. The philanthropy of time. Making yourself available to work in communities, to help, to volunteer. This is the most powerful philanthropy. That is the movement that can change the world more than any billionaire can.
It's education, I think, and what I was talking about before, that if schools can actually include maybe philanthropic activities of kids as they're growing up, and the kids are, willing to give their time or incented to give their time, it will go a long way towards making communities better and really having also this sense of we're all in it together, which is part of what's creating this problem we're all facing of polarization. The polarization, I think, will go down dramatically if we are all in our communities working to improve our lives and to improve our situation. So I think education plays a very important role in it.
There are also a number of initiatives in a number of states. I think in California there's one operating here too. I know we're supporting initiatives in both Utah and Maryland to have a community service. There's fewer and fewer opportunities for meaningful interaction among young people across race, region and class. And we're also seeing younger people with much less regard for democracy. So there's a number of initiatives to fund community service programs. So at a time when there was military service, people got together, got to know others of very different backgrounds than themselves. So now we're trying to fund the equivalent through community service initiatives where students take a year to work for their community with others from different parts, different races, different regions, different backgrounds. And then at the end of this, they will get support for their funding of their university careers. So again, it's to speak to your point about community, building it into the expectation of young people that they actually contribute to the community beyond themselves. We hope if they contribute to it, they will then have more regard for it.
Great, wonderful. Well, I know we're getting close to time, so maybe I'll ask our final question of our panel. We've talked a lot about the complexity of problems that are facing the world, polarization, certainly. What gives each of you hope in this moment as you look towards the future of philanthropy and all that we can do in putting ourselves out of business? What gives you hope and inspiration to stay the course? Would love to have you share that with the room.
Building off the last question, employers, a lot of them, including us, we give employees time off to do philanthropic work, volunteer work, and that's extremely popular. I mean, it can actually be a recruiting tool. I think that the concept that people who are in competitive industries where they're trying to build careers would still rather spend a day a week doing volunteer work is a fairly encouraging sign.
What gives me hope is meeting young people who are the beneficiaries of some of the extraordinary programs we support, like the ones you're describing in Chicago. Kids who come from families with very low expectations of them and then who go on to excel. That's what gives me hope.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, and I think one of the things that has been a really powerful thing, at least for us in our business, is developing this culture of philanthropy and giving back. And it was just a question of finding the right philanthropic, organizations for us to get involved. And it has really, made our business and the whole team at Royalty Pharma much more excited about, what impact we can have and having a sense of purpose in what we all do when we introduce this concept of and culture of giving back. So I'm very encouraged by the impact and the results.
No, thank you. Well, I come from a continent that is where the mean age is 19.7. 1.3 billion people. We will be 2 billion in the next 30, 40 years, I believe. That's a lot of hope for the world.
Well, it's a wonderful note to end on. As we continue our conversation about our shared future, I also want to end with a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, who said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." All of you are living proof that a better world is possible with creative problem solving and collaboration and a commitment to a cause beyond yourselves. I'm grateful for all of you sharing with us today and being part of creating that future that is peaceful, that is fair, that is just, that is prosperous. Thank you all for joining us. And don't go away, because next we are going to unveil the winner of our Milken Motsepe Prize in Green Energy. So if you want more innovation, it's going to be here right now. Please join me in thanking our speakers.